Okay, let's get into this week's assignment, which is database security, week 3. This is for the database administration class, CIT326, and my name is EWhitefield. So we'll just go through this in order, starting with question 1, which is a series of questions that we needed to answer. The first one was, what is Windows authentication in SQL Server? So according to the reading materials, Windows authentication, with Windows authentication, the database engine works with the operating system to authenticate the user account. Basically, we're assuming that with Windows trusting the user, that it's okay for us to trust a user because the user was able to correctly log into a relatively secure system like Windows. Basically, this is called a trusted connection. Basically because the engine is trusting that the OS is doing the validation work correctly. What is the benefit of Windows authentication over SQL authentication? Well, there were two different sources on this. The first one I didn't document because it was a website, but it basically said that SQL authentication support in the Microsoft Server product is basically just there because it's legacy and they're supporting old technology. And they're going forward, it's probably at some point going to go to just Windows authentication only. But I left that out because I couldn't corroborate that anywhere else. But from the reading materials, there were some things that really stood out. And these were the 4 items that kind of, to me, really kind of exemplified why Windows authentication is better. The first one is that in today's day and age of technology, there are just too many logins. Users have way too many logins to remember all of the passwords for. And what ends up happening is that often users will either forget their username, they'll forget their password, they'll forget both. And database administration ends up spending a lot of time fixing errors that really don't need to be fixed if we use the Windows authentication protocols. So basically, since Windows is already doing that, we can assume that the system is secure and then allowing the user to just log into the database engine and do what they need to do. A second reason is that SQL authentication cannot be used with Kerberos or with Kerberos security protocol. I'm not sure what that is. I'm sure that's something that I will be learning as I go through my front end and back end engineer kind of training, but it was listed as one of the reasons why Windows authentication is better. Number 3, Windows has additional password security policies that SQL Server logins just don't have, which again goes back to the fact that that really lends to more security or better security by using the Windows authentication process. And the last one is that the encrypted SQL Server authentication login password must be passed over a network connection at the time of login, and that this small but highly vulnerable point can be used as a security attack point, and people can have their passwords or login information stolen. So using the Windows encryption authentication protocols allows for us to have more security because there's fewer times when information is being passed between the application and the operating system, or the operating system and the network. So the second question was, explain the difference between authentication and authorization. Well, with authentication is where the operating system or the database engine are confirming that the username and password match, that those people have the right security to access the system. Now, for added security, we can add password encryption layers, especially if we're using the Windows authentication process. But the system basically is just evaluating the login credentials of the user. With authorization, what is happening is authorization is a process that happens after authentication, and this is where the database system goes through and verifies or determines what resources this particular user has access to or is allowed to use. An example of authorization in the database is when we created Sam the clerk's login, we limited him to just having authorization to use just the sales order example database. He can see that the others exist, but he cannot log into them and use them. So that would be an example of authorization. Now, the third question in question 1 was, what would happen if you were to grant select permission on a table to the fixed database role called public? Well, this would cause some issues. First of all, this would grant access permission to all the users in the system, because the public role, database role, is given to all user accounts. So that would give access to all users in the system to the different databases. Would this granted permission apply to future users also? Well, yes, it would, because again, this is the default that is being given to people when new logins are created and new user accounts are created. Why would this be dangerous? Because it gives users access to things they don't need to have access to, and that can create security problems. So, like being able to accidentally delete things from a database. All right, so those are the questions that we were asked at the beginning. With question 2 or part 2, we were asked to create some schemas. So we created 4 schemas, 2 in the bowling league example database and 2 in the recipes example database. To show that what I did here, these were the scripting that I used to create the schemas. Basically, we just made sure that we were in the right database, and then we used the create schema command to create the people schema and a schema for places. And just look at the recipes database. We go into security and schemas, and we can see that ingredients and instruction works there. Now, another way to do this would be to go over here to the GUI and to right-click on the word schema and select new schema. And we could just fill out this information. Could look and see what are the different properties or the permissions, or we could just create the schema straight out. If we clicked on OK, this would create a new schema in recipes called new schema. And then if you wanted to, you could also just click up on here and take a look and see, okay, here's what it would look like in scripting form. So quite simple, easy to do. I am not going to finish this because I don't want to create that schema, but that would be how you would create it using the GUI. All right. The second thing that we were asked to do was to transfer tables in the bowling database and the database that I'd chosen, which was recipes, and change them out of DBO and into the new schemas. So the way that I did this was by using the alter schema and the transfer command or script. So made sure I was in the right database, and then using the alter command, I told it to move into the people schema, bowler scores, bowlers, and teams, and then into places, match games, tournaments, and tourney matches. So let's go up here to tables. We can see that under people we have bowler scores, bowlers, and teams, and under places we have match games, tournaments, and tourney matches. So we can see that I had transferred ingredient classes, ingredients, a relatively easy way to get it done. All right, the next question that we were asked is create 4 new logins and map them to an entire schema, 1 for each user. Do this for all 4 of the logins. All right, so creating the logins. I did create logins. First, what I did is I created the master login for logging into the database system. I did that for Dave Lanekeeper, Mavis at the bar, for Gina, and then continuing my script, I then created their user accounts for the specific database. In the case of Dave and for Mavis, it was for Bowling League, and for Gina and for Donnie, it was for the recipes database.